We are recording. I think we should be we are live. I'm always nervous because I'm not good at starting these webinars. So we decided, while everyone's piling in here, we decided that we're going to talk about a non-work related topic. I typically like to pick something random. And today I would like to pick for the first couple minutes while everyone's coming in here to let you know that our guest today, Mr. James Nielsen, at one point in his life ran the world's fastest beer mile. And what that means is he, and James, I want you to unpack a little bit of the magic for us, but essentially you drank a beer, ran a quarter mile, drank another beer, ran a quarter mile, drank another beer, ran a quarter mile, and then drank a fourth beer, ran a quarter mile. And he did that in 4 minutes and 57 seconds. Is that right?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Can you
the good old beer mile.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, the good old beer mile. It's a very popular tradition for multiple decades within the running community, you know, college teams and running clubs throughout the country. And yeah, I was my claim to fame, I guess, or my 15 minutes of fame was breaking the world record and also being the first person to go sub 5. So first person under 5 minutes. And yeah, it's now though, the world record's now 4:33, which is significantly faster than what I ran. And it's officially in the hands of world-class runners. So yeah, former world record holder, definitely not current. I cannot run a 4:32 beer mile, that is for sure.
7. So what is crazy about that is it includes drinking time. Meaning we're not talking about just a 4:57 mile, which alone is impressive, or a mile on after just having shotgunned 4 beers at 4:57. But we're talking about that the drinking time was included. The clock did not stop for the drinking time, and you had to get all the way through the beer.
Yeah, I think I ran about a 4:20 mile and then 36 seconds worth of drinking the 4 beers and the 10-meter chug zone. So yeah, that the time includes both the drinking and the running, and you have to stop to drink, right? You can't be running on the track with a can.
Yeah, well, yeah,
there's a very distinct. Yeah, there's a specific chug zone, 9.3 meters from end to end, so you got to drink within that zone.
Absolutely wild. Like, I can't imagine. Were you not cramping near the end? Were you?
It is an absolutely awful feeling. It is just really bad stomach cramps, both sides. You feel all bloated. The beer's, just splashing around in your gut. It's not a fun day at all.
So I have to ask the one question that probably everyone on the line is wondering, and you guys can jump in the chat if you have any questions to James on this topic in particular. But were you hammered after the mile? Were you thank you so much, everybody? I love you.
Actually, yeah. So
was Journey playing in the background at the end of the mile? And did everything smell like a cigarette?
Yeah. So during the actual run, obviously when the blood's pumping through your body that much, you do feel the alcohol faster. But the reality is, 4 minutes and 57 seconds, right? You're not really buzzed during the beer mile that much. It's the 10-15 minutes afterwards, which, based on your blood alcohol level, you may or may not be buzzed. I would recommend, if anyone wanted to try it, that they should have a designated driver to take them home.
Pretty wild. Well, without further ado, why don't we cut into some content today? I know that everyone didn't show up to listen to the beers. Still very, very impressive. So James, I'm going to hand over the mic to you in a second, but just a couple housekeeping items. Welcome everyone to the first official webinar for the Free Webinar Hub. So we're going to be doing 2 of these at Flip the Script per month. And we wanted to kick off with James is going to be the first victim. So James, I'm really excited to have you here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Should I share my screen here?
You can go ahead and share your screen, but just a little bit of background. I came across James, a couple years back. I believe we were at SaaStr, And I remember you walking up and us just cutting straight into content. And so I've been, had the chance and opportunity to get to know you for the last couple of years, and just love your team, and love, everything that you guys bring to market. And so I'm excited for today's webinar. And I'm also excited because this is going to be the second biggest event of today. Very close second. So I'm going to stay on politics, but I appreciate everyone giving us their time. So without further ado, James, I'm going to hand the mic over to you, and I'm going to try and get out of the way.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yes, there was something big happened this morning, and I'm excited to shift things around and do sales content a little bit. And I do remember our first meeting quite well. I guess we kind of already did introductions, so going right through there. Also to talk about kind of 7 things to help drive your SDR team, and if you're an SDR, to help drive yourself into achieving quota. We kind of decided to give you 2 groups of 7. So we're going to go with 2 kind of curriculum type topics, specifically around sales development, obviously answer questions as they come. And then also kind of as far as an onboarding process goes, and talk a little bit more about the process behind the curriculum. And so we're going to go through 2 groups of 7 here, which is a little added bonus there. So as far as curriculum, right, getting your SDRs ramped and onboarded, that's a key focus for everyone. There's a number of different topics and things to do. And one of the things that often gets skipped within sales development is just going over the fundamentals, right? And so, don't assume that your new SDR kind of knows about the sales development function, right? Core responsibilities, structure of the team. How do you break it up? SDRs, BDRs, inbound, outbound. What does that actually look like from a structure standpoint? Making sure that they run through all of that, understand it. Terms and definitions, right? Every company is slightly different. Do you use MQLs, SQLs, SALs, qualified meetings versus meetings? Is there a stage 0? Is there a discovery stage? Do your SDRs do discovery calls, right? So I know oftentimes most companies nowadays, obviously the SDR team is focused on setting meetings, and they don't really do a whole lot of discovery other than what happens in a cold call. There are lots of organizations out there though that still have SDRs run that first meeting, but that's less and less as the years and quarters go by. But really kind of walking them through just the overall fundamentals of how those teams are run. How do they interact with the account executives, right? Making sure both the SDRs and the AEs know who's working for who, which is neither, right? The SDRs do not work for the AEs. And so making sure that division of responsibility is clear, and how you kind of set those meetings is set up for success from the beginning.
I think that's so important when you're talking about the definitions internally, because I'm just thinking of when I came into the SDR field. By the way, I've already gotten a couple of questions. We will be sending out the slide deck afterwards. And if you guys have any questions, please pile them into the comments, and I'll be kind of monitoring the chat with any questions you have along the way for James and kind of populate them in. But to your point on the definitions of like SQL, SAL, MQL, I remember the first time I heard the term MQL and being like, what does that even mean? Yeah, what are they talking about? So I think that's so interesting that you bring that up, is like the definitions and how they intertwine, or intertwix between the departments.
Exactly. I mean, there's, some companies define a marketing qualified lead as an individual visited your website, and that's literally marketing saying, all right, we drove interest, go chase it down, right? Which, as we all know, visiting your website, I mean, for all you know, they're looking for a job. And so there's a lot of unknown as far as that. And then, of course, there's the MQLs that we all love, which is someone's raising their hand, filling out a web form saying, I want someone on the sales team to call me. And so, then there's a lot in between. So really defining what that terminology is for your business, because not all of those SDR teams out there are run the same way, certainly. And the definitions can change, and also the meaning of those definitions most certainly change.
Totally. The meanings of the definitions, my experience, it's like the unique thing. And I think, I'd be interested to get, in why you covered that. But the unique thing about an SDR job is you're not, an account executive, usually they've done selling before. You usually don't, at least in this day and age in B2B SaaS, you don't walk in the role unless it's a transactional sale into the AE role. So it's less of, I remember, like, for instance, when I was, I waited tables at several different restaurants when I was growing up and bartended and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, when I got to a restaurant, it's like, where is your, whatever, how do you marry the ketchups? Like, you already know all of these different terms. You're just wondering what it is for that bar or that restaurant. Like, who's my bar back, et cetera. Like, where's the ice? But you know what to look for. But it's like an SDR role. This is their first role a lot of times. So they don't even know these definitions. And I think we forget that as SDR leaders, at least I did, of like, okay, I forget that people are just coming into their career. So they probably don't know all these terms. And you almost forget to like walk back to those terms for them and help them, bridge their way into the career.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. So what's topic number 2?
Yeah, topic number 2 is product and company knowledge, right? So oftentimes as leaders, we assume during the interview process, they did their homework, they asked questions, they've obviously read every word on the website. But make assumptions, right? Start from the beginning, kind of talk about the company mission. What is the company up to, right? Is there vision and values that have been created, right? Are the values, written up on a wall somewhere in the kitchen? Is there a document? But what does that look like? The origin story, right? Why was the company founded? What's the problem that it solves? Make sure you don't skip over those things, because oftentimes we just assume that once they show up for day one, they still need to start learning the product and the market, and then what the call script is and go, right? But take a step back, make sure they really understand what the company's up to. The executive team, right? What's the background of them? Why did they join? How long have they been there? Who are the leaders within the organization, right? Not just within the sales team, but overall. It's good for individuals to really make sure. Don't just assume that they went on LinkedIn and spent hours worth of research. Again, hopefully they did a good part of that during the interview process, but that might have been multiple weeks or months ago. And so don't skip over those. The different departments, right? We have a tendency to focus on the sales departments. Here's the SDR, BDR team. Here's the AEs. We have a customer success team. Here's how you interact with marketing. But talk about product and engineering and how the engineering team is structured, the different features and functionality or products that they're building, and how that's organized. And so, yeah, definitely don't skip over some of those steps. The market landscape, right? Who are all the players in the market, not just from a competitive standpoint, but oftentimes, whether they come from your industry or not, obviously in the SDR role, they probably come from no industry. They're probably a recent college graduate or a career switcher. And so don't make assumptions about them understanding the market. Really start with the basics. I would rather, if you have a cohort of individuals starting, I would rather have those 1 or 2 people hear it for a second time than err on a handful of individuals never hearing it before. And so really kind of start with the basics. And then from a product overview perspective, obviously making sure they understand the product and really start with the problem that it solves, and then you can go into details. But really take the time to make sure that they understand your company and your product. Don't make this part of a 20-minute presentation the first day and then never talk about it again. This is a really important part that often gets accelerated to way too fast.
So no, it's interesting. Why do you think that the origin story is important for the company?
Yeah, I think it's just really important of, first of all, who are the leaders, and then why are they leading the ship, right? What's the problem that's solving? People talk about product market fit often, but what about founder market fit, right? Why did the founders decide to start this business? Is it solving a personal passion that they have, right? Do they really understand the frustration, right? I don't want to make this about Vendition, but I've spent my whole career building sales development teams, and I found it very frustrating that I couldn't figure out, how do I find out who's interested in sales? How do I assess them and interview them for a skill set that they don't have by definition? And then training them was a major resource constraint, right? So, Vendition started out of a frustration and passion of my own. So find out that story for your business, right? Why did the founder start that story, start that company, and figure out the story? I think that's really important part of joining an organization. It helps you understand the direction that they're going and how they're building the company.
That's so interesting. So how do you think, if someone was in the field, like you, for instance, it's like you're in the field, you see this need for, how do I build SDR teams? How do you think that changes the company or the experience in working in the company if you have a founder that comes from that pain point?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a founder that first of all, they understand the problem that they're trying to solve, right? Which I believe is very important, and they have personally experienced that problem, right? And so, you founding Flip the Script, Becc, right? You found it very frustrating that the vast majority of SDRs out there were not hitting quota, and they were undertrained and they were underperforming, and it was not only frustrating you within the teams that you ran, but you realize as, nationwide or even worldwide, that's a problem. And eventually you decided, how can I solve this, right? And not just for my team, but so that, that's very relevant versus someone who just says like, hey, I think I'm going to start shooting some sort of content. Looks like there's not much out there about sales. What can I do, right? So those are two very different issues. And so if you're working at a company within the cybersecurity landscape, why did that business get started, right? Did they work at a business that was hacked? Did they find massive gaps within security of their businesses? What were the implications of that? And so I think really trying to understand what drives those executives and founders, I think, is extremely important.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree with you more. Of like, I have worked for companies where the founder was the CEO and founder was someone who saw a product market or a gap in the market, but wasn't actually a practitioner. And even though they were really, really smart and cerebral, the difference between that and a company that I worked for where they came from the buyer persona is there's just more passion here. There was more understanding, there was more passion, and there was more drive, because to your point, it's like they want to solve that problem using their company. And even though this arguably was the better idea, you
Yeah.
saw it in the fervor of everyone that this person hired, everyone that this person, like they were the company at that point.
Right.
And so it made it really fun to be a part of the organization, because I'm like, I don't necessarily fit into a marketing ICP in this case scenario, but it's easy to fall in love with the company because my leader is so passionate, and it makes me want to know more. Quick question I have. So Abigail Laboida, basically, maybe I screwed up how to say her name, so you'll have to give me a little bit of grace, but she asked a great question. How deep should a product overview be initially? She said, we sell tech services, and one of the issues is knowing how deep you should go, in the product overview for the SDRs. I would think, especially if it's a very technical product.
Yeah, so there's two parts of that. One is, how do you define initially, right? Are we talking about first day, first week, first month? I'm a big fan of SDRs taking the time to really understand your product. I completely understand that the goal of the sales development function is to sell problems, not solutions. And so really you're trying to uncover these massive pain points and convince your prospect that they have a problem that needs to be solved, and it needs to be solved now. It's not about doing solution mapping. That's really more of the account executive role. That being said, I feel like you can have those conversations if you understand your product extremely well. So my recommendation is to generally go pretty deep within the product, but that doesn't have to be on your first day or first week, right? You have time to do that. You need to understand, right, the product and company knowledge, the founding story, the problems that you solve. The first couple of weeks of new hire training should be focused on the problems that you solve. But if you map out a 30, 60, 90, I'd say within that third month, you should be diving relatively deep into the product. I'm a big fan of SDRs really understanding the product, whether you need to sell it or not. I just feel like it's going to make you a better rep. And also, the goal is probably to move into a closing role at some point. And so you're going to need to learn eventually. You might as well learn now, and you can start picking up those customer anecdotes and stories and functionalities over the quarters and years that you're there.
That's great. That's great. Thanks for the question, Abigail. Okay, topic 3. What's topic 3?
Tools, right? Huge part. Don't underestimate how important it is. I know it's, like, hey, we're going to use Salesforce. Here's how to use it. You poke around here. These are the mandatory fields. Don't hand it off to an AE until you have these checked off. Good. Okay, let's move on. No, like, make sure you take the time to make sure they understand that you're going to save yourself all kinds of pain down the road. I still remember in one of the SDR teams I managed many years ago, we had, the account executives were broken up by geography. And so the sales development team eventually was broken up by geography as well. We had all of our web forms come into one view, and we didn't have the city or state. And I realized this until someone finally complained about it in the kitchen. They said, yeah, every SDR every morning would come in and have to look at every single lead to figure out where they were. And I was like, you have to tell me this. And sure enough, we quickly added that row of the city and state, and it solved the problem. But this is an oversight from me. But it's one of those things that the SDRs never expressed their frustration. No one knew how easy it was to add that field. And so I'm a big fan of taking the time to really understand the tools that you use. Err on being ahead of the bell curve, right? Like, know the tools better than you think the minimum requirement to do your job. obviously you have some sort of CRM, you have that cadence tool, right? Enablement tool, it's called a lot of different things, but you know who the major players are in this space. Usually that's the primary focus for sales development. Some sort of data, right? Is your database pre-populated? How do you find direct dials, phone numbers? I threw call intelligence up for you there, Becc, because you've been in that space. And so is there a call intelligence platform? How does that work? How do you make sure that it's properly introduced into calls? And so it's not just training on those tools, but also how they all work together, right? What's that integration look like? If I log a call in Outreach, is that going to pop up in Salesforce, right? How does that mapping work, and is that all done? So make sure you understand how all these tools work, what you're allowed to edit and not edit. If it's a large company, they might be telling you, don't change the phone number. We spent a lot of money finding that, even if it's wrong. You have to ping someone. Smaller companies, it's, hey, if you see inaccurate data, just fix it, right? You don't have to ask any questions. So figure out what the process and policies are around your tools, but take the time to learn your tools. It's extremely important when onboarding a new SDR.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And it's so interesting to me that it's like really the tool's effectiveness comes down to the bottleneck of the user's understanding. Exactly. Right. So, I mean, let's go generic CRM, for instance. I think we all know, who the major player is, but it's like, I'm using a CRM, it can do a billion things. But if I don't know how to do that, like essentially it's kind of like, it's like the complexity of the tool or the ability of the tool isn't necessarily, what it's going to come down to for the SDR. So it's like, especially CRM in specific, some of the most successful SDRs that I know had a very good understanding of the CRM because they knew how to segment and build lists of like people who requested a demo but didn't actually get into a demo, or close loss went competitive up on renewal 10 months out from now. And all of a sudden they have a short list that like, it was like they were brilliant, brilliant at the CRM. So I think this is really important. Question in from Ed Sharp: how long should the introduction or training period last for? I'm going to say in general, but with tools in specific, how long should this training last for, and how intense should it be?
Yeah, so in general, I'm a big fan of the 30, 60, 90, and I know we're all trying to figure out how do you ramp SDRs faster? How do you make new hire training be 1 week or 2 weeks long? But the reality is, even if they're expected to hit full quota in month 2, they're still learning. And so I would kind of map out what that 30, 60, 90 does. Looks like. It also happens to be roughly what a college or university quarter semester, 10 to 15 weeks. So I think we're kind of in that mentality of, what do you get over a 3-month period? Yeah. As far as the tools training, I mean, I would definitely tackle this in week 1, if possible, right? And potentially in week 2, but I would, get them comfortable with the tools and using them while they're learning and going through and building out reports. And so I think it doesn't have to be the first day, but I would certainly tackle this within the first couple of weeks on the job. I think tools training is really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We actually have a number of questions coming in around the tools training. So I'm gonna do one more, or why don't we do? Well, I'll do 2 more. Sunny asked, have you brought in tool vendor reps to help with the training, or is it done internally? I think that's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm interested to hear your opinion on this as well, Becc, but generally I've seen that work best internally. And so I guess, again, it depends on the tools, but if you have a CRM data intelligence tool that has been within your business and you've had them for several quarters, several years, oftentimes your sales development leader or sales enablement leader can kind of walk through the SDR. If you have pre-recordings and demos of what that looks like, most of the larger players too have pretty good kind of content built out on their website, sometimes a little bit more support-y than training, but there is training content there. So clearly, if you want to bring in a vendor and as part of your package that you get some training and customization, I wouldn't turn that down. It's nothing else. It saves you time, but usually the sales development function is using it simple enough, and your implementation is custom enough that I generally find it best done by your leaders within your business, but I'm not going to turn down a free session if it's offered. But that would be in supplement to what you're already doing internally. I wouldn't have your SDR manager not walk them through Salesforce in order to let Salesforce walk them through Salesforce, because I feel like you're going to miss out on a lot of things. But I'm curious to hear your opinion, Becc.
Yeah, no, I pretty mirrored to yours. If you can get the rep to come in and do the training, what's interesting for me is when I've had people do internal training, what ends up happening is it surfaces how my SDR team is using that tech. And I'm like, oh, shoot, this is all wrong. How you're using it, you could go blank, blank, and blank. And so it made me do a deep dive and like, oh, shoot, this is how we're using that. Like there's a faster way to do that. And so I think if you can do both, and something I've done in the past is like, okay, you give it as a step ramp of like junior SDR, senior SDR, and one of the promotional items. I mean, they obviously get the comp and et cetera, but on the responsibility end, that they will run onboarding sessions, for a tool perspective, or, you really could do anything, but certainly tools is a great way to do this. I do think it's important for them to know not how, let's use outreach works in general, but how we use outreach at, Cloudflare, for instance. So I think that that's really important if your use case internally, but I do think that it does surface, sometimes some holes of like, oh, okay, like I want to be very, very careful that someone's not training someone else to do something that I don't essentially want them to do. So I would have them review that course with me before they do the walkthrough. I'm going to do one more question and then I know we need to move on so we stay on time. Kinsey Eaton had a great question. Do you have a preference on self-paced versus live training for tools?
Yeah, so I do have a preference, and it's both. And I know that makes it seem like I'm dodging the question, but this is something that we're going to definitely talk about today.
Inauguration day.
Yeah, yeah. But I am a.
Just kidding. I won't mention politics again. I promise. No one jump off the line because of my comment.
But I am a. Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of the fact that people learn differently, right? And so I think if you're forcing everyone to do one or the other, it's a mistake, right? I know that there are individuals that thrive in an environment where they can control the pace, slowing things down, watching a section twice or three times, another section they can move quite quickly. Other individuals prefer a live environment because they learn better by asking questions immediately, right? It's not, they get frustrated with videos and tutorials and documentation. They kind of need to see that, say, wait, can you dive in there? Move on, I get that, no problem. So yeah, I know that's more work for you, but I definitely recommend having both options available. And I would say, the individuals that learn better through a live environment, I would still give them that on-demand content. And those individuals that thrive better in a self-paced on-demand type world, I would still give them that live session. But yeah, I know that might not be what you want to hear, but I am a huge advocate of the fact that people learn differently. And so you should provide them those options to learn in whatever they are most effective in doing so.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Okay, let's move on. Topic 4.
So process, right, of just making sure they understand the process. And this is one of the things that I think frustrates a lot of sales dev leaders and SDRs is that, speaking of kind of learning in different environments, is that you tell someone in their first week in a whiteboard session, or now it's virtually over Zoom, but you walk through a process of this is how you hand off a lead to an account executive. You run through that once and you just assume that that's burned into their mind forever because you know it so well and you've taught so many people, but the reality is, they might not learn that way. And so when you start seeing errors, it becomes frustrating for both parties because they're not quite grasping it. So making sure the process is documented, it is reviewed live, right? And kind of, asynchronously, but kind of what is that lead qualification process, the handoff process? What's the structure of, is there an inbound SDR team and an outbound SDR team? Is there an SDR and BDR? Are those two different functions? What does that look like? How are they defined? Is it broken up by industry, geography? So just really taking the time, kind of breaking this out into its own kind of topic and category of just making sure, inbound, outbound, I used your word here, Becc, postbound.
My heart is so warm right now that you use the word postbound.
Yeah, it might be called warmbound in a lot of our content, but I'm going to go with, I'm your guest here today, so I'm going to go with postbound.
You're in my house, James.
Yeah, exactly. I can play by the rules, no problem.
So what is define postbound for people? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so, an inbound lead, are people raising their hand, filling out web forms saying, I want to talk to your sales team. Outbound arguably is, quite cold. You've identified a target account that you want to go reach out to. And postbound is that somewhat warm-ish, right? So there's someone that has been engaging with your content. Maybe they attended a webinar, they downloaded a case study. They swung by and got some candy at the latest conference you were at. And so you think they're familiar with your company. There's a spectrum there, of course, in what postbound is, right? There's some pretty warm postbound, there's some pretty cold postbound, but it looks like there's some interest in your business and some knowledge of your business, but I wouldn't quite don't let your marketing team get away with calling that an inbound lead, because it probably isn't. So how did I do there, Becc?
It was great. It was great. It was great. No, but I think to your point, it's like when I go in and work with teams, most of what people crave or think that they crave is messaging, like tactical. They're like, teach me that one subject line that will blow everyone's mind and they'll open, but I'm like, most of the success of sales development comes down to process. I'd hate to be the bearer of bad news. It's like messaging is definitely part of it. But, a great example is, connects per day. So everyone's like, you should make more dials, or what should I say to this objection? Or when someone says they're not interested, or what's the introduction piece, blah, blah, like that's what they want to know. But I'm like, wait, time out. Industry average is 40 dials per day, which yields 3 connects per day. So we shouldn't be we're asking the wrong question. We're not, the question should be, how do I increase my connects per day? What time should I be calling? Are there different variables? Like that's what we essentially need to solve more, for more, because it's like, essentially we're not getting that many bats, and that comes down to process. So I'm like, the lion's share from my perspective, it's like, yeah, we can talk about tactical, and that's very important because that's what people need to say, in the 30, whatever the elevator pitch. But it's like most of it, to your point, I love that you semi-led with this, is like it comes down to how tight your process is. So I absolutely love this slide.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality is, sales development reps are, probably costing businesses between $60,000 and $100,000 per year, fully loaded, based on geos and years of experience, things like that. But the reality is, if you're spending 80 grand a year on your SDR team, or per person on your SDR team, and they're making 3 dials a day, like there is a process inefficiency. Like, spend the time to really make sure that SDRs are equipped with an efficient process, and that they are spending time. I mean, the whole reason the sales development function exists is because account executives were too inefficient prospecting, and maybe not very motivated, and potentially not very good at it. But it was kind of, the sales role ended up bifurcating, and we created this sales development function in order to help the AEs focus on what they're good at, which is running sales cycles and closing processes. And so now, from a sales development function, there's so much data and tools out there that there's not enough time spent selling at most organizations. And so get that process down so that your SDRs are not spending 70 to 80% of their week, looking up direct dials, right? That is an inefficient process that's being run. And so it needs to be tweaked, and get those SDRs prospecting, which is what they're good at and what they enjoy doing.
Yeah, I want to double down here, because I'm like, this to me is probably the most important side. It's like, people ask me like, hey, should you have a 5-minute rule for the inbound leads? And like, does that increase conversion from the demo request process? Or, what should I say from the inbound perspective? I'm like, time out. I could teach you a 3-step process using one piece of tech that costs $12 a month that circumvents the need for a rep.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I tell people that. Yeah.
Increase the conversion from 12% to 72%. And now you can use that rep on personalized outbound to hunt some ABM accounts that you need to walk into the door. So it's like, that's a process item. That's not tactical. I know you're asking me for tactical, but there's a process way to do this. And I've done it, with several people. And so I just can't harp on this enough, of most of the enablement to the SDR team. It comes down to, do I have a lethal process, and does my SDR understand what the process is from a, daily mapping view? So I think this is so huge. I'm glad you put it in here. Okay, so topic 5, because I know we have a sneaky back end where you're going to go into some pretty interesting stuff that I'm excited about. I've seen it, full disclosure, not to bait everyone, but topic 5.
Topic 5, prospecting, right? And so good old fashioned outbound prospecting. And so this is a big one. We could probably do an entire webinar around here. You'll notice I use some of your own language there, ICP, ICC, depending on what you want to call it, ideal customer profile, ideal customer company, right? Make sure you understand who you want as customers, whether that's driven by you, the sales team, the executive team, the marketing team. Make sure you really understand who you want as accounts and why. And this can be tiered as well, right? Nothing wrong with that. Buyer personas, ICTs, right? So who is that ideal customer? Is it, kind of the different titles that you're looking for? Is it the personas? Is it the level of seniority, right? Kind of demographics, psychographics, really understand who your buyer is, make sure they understand that. It really helps them have those conversations and reach out to individuals. And so, don't burn through this in a 20-minute session. It's like, okay, now it's buyer persona time. I'm going to lecture my new hires for 15 minutes, and then I expect them to be experts for the next year, right? It's just not, not enough time is spent on that. How do you sell to those different personas, right? What are the problems that they have? What do they care about, right? There's like different profiles that sometimes people create, exactly, they map out who these individuals are, do they have dogs or cats, right? I mean, it's like sometimes people get to be really specific around trying to understand the persona of their buyer, which is fun, but make sure obviously it scales. And then segmentation, right? Is how you break that up. How much time do you spend on different buyers? What does that look like? The different, again, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 accounts, what does that look like? And so making sure that the system is engineered properly and that the SDRs are equipped to spend their time efficiently. How and what to research about people and accounts. Again, you've got a lot of great content on your platform there, Becc. And so I highly encourage everyone listening to go and dive in, learn about the different premises and how you reach out, but kind of like, what kind of research are you doing, right? You're trying to do the whole 3x3, right? Three interesting topics in 3 minutes. What does that look like? So just kind of make sure that you are efficiently finding out information that is relevant to what we'll get to next, which is the messaging teaser. What channels to use, right? And so how do you go about reaching out to individuals, right? If your entire outbound prospecting strategy is sending cold emails, it's probably time to kind of create some new channels, because not everyone is responding to emails. And in fact, as the quarters and years go by, that's becoming less and less responsive. And then there's also kind of tops down versus bottoms up, right? There's a school of thought, go after that ultimate DM. This is a marketing, we sell marketing tech. I'm going after the CMO, right? She's the ultimate decision maker. I'm going right for her inbox, right for her voicemail, versus the kind of bottoms up approach, which is like, let me find someone junior within the organization, start doing some research and figure out if I can get introductions on my way up. And obviously there's different reasons to do different tactics, but make sure that you are training your reps the why behind the tops down versus bottom up approach.
Out of curiosity, is my own question. I'm just going to pretend like people are asking the question that I want to know. Why did you put buyer persona so near the top of this list for prospecting?
Yeah, it's just so important to understand your buyer. I mean, really take the time, especially, you're an SDR, it's your first job out of college, your first job within tech sales. If you don't understand who you're selling to, it just, it makes your job very challenging, right? So if you really take the time to figure out what is the day in the life of that individual, where do they spend time? What are the frustrations? What are their personal career goals, right? It's kind of, there's so much involved in that individual and what they care about, right? At the end of the day, people are buying technology, right? Not companies. There's a company name that's on the top, but you have to drive, it's a human decision. And so you have to really understand your buyer and what they care about in order to be the winning vendor in a sales kind of a cycle. And so make sure you really understand your buyer.
I couldn't echo what James says enough. I'm like, the reason I asked that question is the longest session that I have had as a person onboarding into a company on buyer persona was a 30-minute session.
Yeah.
That was the longest session that I had at some companies that included it all. And I'm like, arguably, this is all you need to know. You need to know what the person that you're talking to cares about by and large. And the outreach that I get, I have gotten 2 pieces of outreach over the last couple of weeks where someone's like, hey, could you introduce me to your head of inside sales? we sell like sales engagement software. And I'm like, okay, I am a CEO of a single member LLC, meaning it's just me, that, so I have no head of inside sales or reps, that teaches people how to be personalized in their outreach in inside sales. And I have a integration live with your biggest competitor. Arguably the number one most unqualified prospect on the globe that you're talking to. But it's like, to your point, this buyer persona, I'm like, that's to me where you should just double down in terms of prospecting. So I'm so interested that you put that near the top. So I think impressed by you is the word I'm looking for, that you put that near the top, because I think that's so important. Okay, so let's transition topic 6, and we can do
right. This could arguably be part of topic 5, but yeah, messaging, right? And so cold emailing, cold calling, social selling, right? Non-traditional, right? Whether it's videos through LinkedIn, videos through email, gifting, right? Are you sending expensive bottles of wine or fidget spinners, right? And everything in between. And so really think about the different channels that you're selling to. And I'm not super, I don't have super strong opinions on what order these should be done in, obviously. I like starting with cold emailing because I just think it makes you think about the structure of how you kind of write. And then I think the conversational part of it can come later. But if you feel strongly that you should lead with cold calling, then, I would support that as well. So it kind of depends on your business and your, as a sales dev leader, kind of your personal preference. But, and obviously objection handling over all of those channels. Objection handling on a cold call is very different than objection handling over an email, right? Someone responds to an email, you have time to think about it, articulate your response, try to drive enough interest to get a response to that email. So those are two, and also if there was interacting with you over email, they're willing to do that. If you're calling them, they didn't necessarily say they wanted to talk to you, but they obviously picked up the phone. And so, yeah, I think just obviously we could spend many hours talking about messaging. This is crucial. And again, don't make this a 30-minute or 60-minute session. This is an ongoing iterative process. You really need to work on it, whether you want them to just take the playbook and run with it, or it's completely customized and you're able to allow your SDRs the freedom of coming up with all their own messaging, or it's something in between, which is there's a somewhat of a structure. You need to obviously lead with personalization and relevance, and how does that properly scale? What is that teaser? What's the CTA? So you kind of walk through all those different pieces, but don't take any shortcuts when it comes to messaging. This is a crucial part of outreach.
That's so great. And like, what's the long-term vision of getting them trained on all of these channels right up front?
The long-term vision is they can do it all on their own. Is that kind of what you were asking, or?
Go ahead, say it again.
Just make sure I clarify the question. The long-term vision as far as their kind of subject matter knowledge, or?
Right. Yeah. Why start with messaging is my question.
Yeah, that's basically what the role is, right? You're trying to generate enough interest that they're going to go take a discovery meeting with your account executive. And so making sure you understand the messaging that works for different individuals at different businesses in order to interact with you, whether it's in an email thread or over the phone, so that you can do your discovery and set proper meetings for your account executives. This is the core function of the job when it comes to sales development.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We have a question that's kind of apropos to this from Roy Armstrong. He said, how do you approach a retargeting outreach? So for example, where a company has previously had a demo of the product, and now I'm assuming it's been 4 months or 5 months or 6 months from I would assume he's asking from a automation perspective, but more importantly, the messaging perspective.
Yeah, so those are great like leads to have, is what they've somewhat engaged with you in the past. Believe it or not, but my opinion is that, I wouldn't really run those plays too differently than cold outbound, because the reality is your business and company has potentially changed, their business and priorities have potentially changed. And so, the notes field that someone took, 6-9 months ago might be slightly outdated. So it's great that you have that information, but it's not massively different than how you would if you were cold outreaching to them. Now, if you did fully run through a sales cycle and you lost the deal, what was the story there, right? Did you lose to a competitor? They just decide not to buy anything because it wasn't a priority for them. You also hopefully have some good notes on potentially why you lost. And so you can kind of lead with some of those. When you do lose a deal, you hopefully have learned why you lost, what the priorities were, and why they decided not to go with you. Again, did they go with a competitor or did they not make any decision? And so, yeah, you definitely want to use that information to your advantage, but I would definitely don't make assumptions about their previous purchasing decisions and that their priorities are all the same now than they were 9 months ago. So I would re-go through discovery.
That's great. That's great. Okay, point 7, topic 7.
Topic 7 is professional development. So this is really important. I think oftentimes, especially when you're in your first week, first month on a job as an SDR leader, you're not thinking about their personal development. You just need to get them effective at their job. But I think it's good to set the precedence that they're thinking about, kind of their professional career and how that progresses, right? The reality is they're probably going to not work for you and your organization forever. And so setting them up for success is important, especially sales development, which is oftentimes their first job, is certainly within tech. And so internal communication, right? Both previous to COVID and during COVID, right? As far as, what's appropriate, when to use email, when to use Slack, is text messaging okay? What does that all look like? Having that growth mindset. And so what are, to set up their goals, you don't want to tease them out of pushing them into an AE role in their first week, but also it's nice to know kind of roughly, is that the path that they want or what they're interested in? How to have work conversations, right? Whether it's over the phone or over Slack. And obviously within the technology world that we live in, oftentimes we form good personal relationships. Again, you said you weren't going to talk politics anymore, but I certainly will. But yeah, just be careful about those kinds of things and kind of what's appropriate and what's not. Networking within, right? And so we often talk about how do you meet everyone within kind of the GTM, the go-to-market team, marketing, customer success, but who's your product managers, who are your engineers, who are the ones that have been there for a while. So definitely go ahead and do a virtual coffee with the head of engineering, right? You'd be surprised how willing people are to meet their coworkers, especially nowadays. And so don't be afraid to network within. How to manage one-on-ones, right? So make sure you set the expectations, whether you're an SDR and you want to learn how to manage up, or you're a manager. Make sure you set clear expectations about this is how, who's in charge of the agenda, what's covered, are decisions being made? If they're not being made, what are the action items, what are the deliverable dates? And so really making sure that you run effective one-on-ones is important. Work from home environments, right? So just make sure you have a good, comfortable work from home environment. What does that look like? What's professional, what's not, how can you, is your Wi-Fi connection, do you need an external keyboard and mouse? Just making sure that you have a good setup to be uncomfortable. Too often people are quiet, right? SDRs don't want to ask for anything, and it's secretly killing them that they don't have a second monitor set up, right? So make sure you have what you need to be productive at your job. And then overall, just professionalism. And again, we can elaborate on this quite a bit, but making sure that expectations are set around what is professionalism in the workplace, even in a work from home environment. What does that look like? And how do they make sure that they know what's kind of acceptable and what's not within this virtual world that we live in, and also the in-person world that we'll hopefully be in soon.
Yeah, I have one question, then we can move on to the fun second half. But why did you list internal communication and growth mindset and work conversations near the top? Because I think very important what you did there.
Yeah, they're just so important. I mean, you need to learn how to communicate with your colleagues, right? I mean, internal communication, the reality is, it's a job, right? And you're paid for a service to be a sales development representative. And so making sure you know how to communicate internally, not only with your peers, with the account executives, which is a different department, within your leadership, right? Your head of sales development, or your immediate manager, that might be the same person, or maybe you have a sales development manager and then there's a director of sales development above her. It's like, what does that look like? And so make sure that you really understand kind of how to communicate internally. That growth mindset, right? You want to hire, companies want to hire people that are trying to learn and grow and improve. And so you need to have that mentality when you go into a job, because the reality is you probably don't know how to be an SDR all that well. And so how do you continue to improve and iterate? There are a lot of great SDRs out there that have been SDRs for multiple years and they still have a lot of room to improve, right? it's a relatively junior function within most organizations. And so there are people that have been doing their job for 30 years that's still looking to improve. And so don't think you're an expert after a year, right? There's a long way to go.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. If someone would have taught me that I'm also selling internally when I was young, they could have saved me a lot of heartache.
Yeah.
A lot of heartache, because you just assume like, oh, okay, this is family and those are the bad, those are the people that we're selling into. And it's like, there's so much in terms of, politics and how to not circumvent my manager, and how, what a skip level is, and, how to have a productive relationship with my peers, and how to manage up and how to manage sideways and how to manage down. And like, I think that that's just so important, and it's a skill set that I couldn't underscore more, that needs to be included. Okay, I know that we have about 10 minutes left. Why don't we go 5 over the hour for everyone, and let's get into, this is something that I was really excited about when I started working with your team, and understanding that you saw onboarding from a very different perspective that I had never seen before. So for everyone on the line, I pushed James to essentially product pitch a little bit, and just give us, or not product pitch, but give us a peek behind the curtain on how you're designing. For people who don't know, Vendition, works with to place SDRs essentially, and get them ramp trained, hired, and to quota more quickly. And so I was very, very impressed by how you guys were even thinking about designing an onboarding program from a high level. So I'm excited about this second half. I am, going to push it to you. I know we only have 15 minutes. We'll go 5 over, and then we can close out.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try to make it, I'll try to run through as much as I can in the next 9 minutes for those that have meetings at the top of the hour, and then we can go a few minutes over. But yeah, I think in addition to the curriculum, as Becc mentioned, one thing I want to really emphasize is just like the whole learning process, right? We call it the Vendition learning experience, or VLX design. But you want to think about learning and education, not just from here's the curriculum, here are the plays, go memorize that, right? Because the reality is, people learn differently, and your company is different, your products are different, and people learn differently. So, what is VLX, right? That's kind of our kind of customized, and I'll read here, customized instructional design, curriculum, and user experience personalized for every SDR. So this is what we do as a business. We provide a very personalized onboarding experience per SDR, per company, because the reality is, every company is different, every business is different, every product is different. And also the learner, right? Your new SDR is different, right? There's 8 billion people on the planet, and we're all different. And so if you're onboarding everyone the exact same way, be aware that it might not be the best learning environment and experience for every person, right? And I know that and I've been guilty of this early in my career, right? You pack 8 people in a conference room, you teach them, about the competitive landscape, you whiteboard it out, and then you just assume they know it, right? And that might work well for some people, but it doesn't work well for everyone. And so if you break up this into kind of 3 components, one, just kind of a teaching methodology. I'll share what we do. The second part of that is the actual curriculum design, right? Which is kind of usually what people start with, is just go make the design. And the last part of that is, how is the teaching and learning actually taking place? So again, what's the methodology behind the teaching process? What is the actual curriculum and content in the course? And then how is that teaching actually executed? And so I'll break this up into kind of 7 steps for here. And again, you can use this. This isn't like Vendition only. This is our kind of philosophy, but we're sharing it. So as far as having some sort of teaching process, and again, apologize, I spent 10 plus years in academia. I thought about being a college professor. So I'm a big fan of this understanding the learning experience. Here at Vendition, we follow what we call backwards design, right? So we start with the outcomes, right? So really clearly identifying what are the results and outcomes we want during an onboarding program. And that can be, after 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, but actually identifying what those outcomes are first, and then figuring out what's the, how do you determine acceptable evidence, right? What's the test, right? That actually proves that those outcomes are achieved. So we want them to be proficient in cold calling, but how do you actually validate and verify that they are proficient in that? And then you plan the learning experience, right? And so, what I mean by backwards is that if we're looking over here on the right, identify desired results, identify what those results are, then determine the acceptable evidence, and then you plan the learning experience, right? And what often people do, and don't feel bad if you do this, right? This is human nature. A lot of college professors do it this way, which is they first design the curriculum, and then they figure out, how am I going to test them on that? And then after they get the test results, they figured out who passed and didn't pass. And, yes, you understand partial differentiation. And so, kind of like, you walk through that process, right? And so oftentimes we design curriculum, and then we determine evidence, and then we results. But I would recommend kind of the opposite. As far as step 2 here, so this is a big thing that we are advocates of at Vendition, is kind of that theory versus practice, right? So breaking up into 3 categories, there's knowledge, skill, and then the actual performance metrics. So within sales development, and really sales in general, we're so obsessed with metrics that if you hit quota, then you obviously know how to do the job, right? And sure, after a year and 12 consistent months of quota attainment, if they hit their quota 12 months in a row, there's probably a pretty good chance that they understand what they're doing. But within 30 days, how can you really validate whether or not they're absorbing the curriculum just by looking at their numbers, right? The quota is a meeting a week. They set 2 meetings over the last 2 weeks. So I assume that they know how to do their job, right? And I want to make sure that, there's a risk there for false positive or false negative. And so really breaking out knowledge versus skill, performance metrics is obvious, but even within the aspect of knowledge versus skill, right? Knowledge, do they know how to do it? So if I go and do a training session on cold calling, they might pass every test, right? Even do some role playing. What does that look like? But when they actually get on the phone, they're struggling. And so there is a difference between knowledge and skill, having the knowledge to understand how to do that in the skill set. Same thing with doing research on a prospect. They might understand they have to go find, something that is timely, that's personalized, that's relevant. How does it look like? You walk them through that, they pass all your tests, and then you let them go out there in the wild, and they're, the cold emails are not working, and it's not very relevant, right? So they found something personalized but not relevant. So really break up, think about how do you assess them from a knowledge perspective and from a skill perspective, in addition to the obvious, which is the performance metrics. But I feel like too many SDR leaders only think about the metrics. And if they're hitting their quota, I don't really care. But during that 30, 60, 90, you want to actually validate that they have the knowledge and skill to do the role. And you can give them a test, right? There's a number of different ways to make that assessment. And then one more part here on the kind of methodology is we call curriculum feedback loops. And so we want to make sure that the learning is kind of changes based on how they're doing. So you teach someone how to do something, you assess them. If they pass, great. If they failed, where did they fail, and how does that impact future learnings? And so, I could geek on about this for hours, but I want to oversimplify this for now, of just thinking about, as you're teaching sales development to your new SDRs that you're onboarding, based on how they're absorbing the knowledge, make sure that you're tweaking future curriculum, right? And per individual. And I know that takes a lot of time, and not everyone is Vendition clients. You can just depend on us to help them out. But when you're looking at that, and Mohammed over here is just really struggling with getting past the gatekeeper on a cold call. He just, for whatever reason, he's struggling there. So obviously you need to work with him on that. Whereas Maria can't get everyone to reply to her email for the life of her. And so what does that look like? And how do you work with her on her outbound email? And so individuals are different, they're learning different. And so making sure that the curriculum is being edited for that individual. There was a question earlier about I almost want to call it learning styles, but do you want to have that live tools training, or should it be done on demand? And the reality is people learn differently. And so if you do a whiteboarding session on how to use Salesforce and one individual is struggling, then maybe think about giving them access to a recording where they can go study it on their own time. And so again, the curriculum for how to teach them how to use Salesforce is actually changing based on how they're doing. As far as the course design, so I'm going to skip through this because we talked about that first, right? Of just here's a sample, 5 modules. We went through the 7 topics earlier, right? 5, 7, 10. You kind of pick out how you want to design that curriculum. Oftentimes businesses are pretty good at this. And so definitely make sure you're breaking up the things we talked about, sales fundamentals, company and product knowledge, founding story, right? But, the course design is something that hopefully everyone is comfortable with, but make sure you take the time to design that course once you have the methodology and process lined up. And then finally, these last steps here are about delivering the actual teaching. And so from a web-based training perspective, make sure that the teachings are written down, right? Whether you want to record videos, I give a plug here for Flip the Script. So if you want to drive your
That's why I
SDR,
was thumbs upping for, just for the record, I was thumbs upping because I agree with this point, but that is also nice. Good luck, James.
yeah, so if you don't have content, right? I mean, go through. Obviously, I recommend you watch all of Beck's videos, but if there are, these, like, here's the 3 videos that I think are most relevant for SDRs in their first week, go grab those and give them to your team, right? Beck's content's always free. Go in there and grab it and identify what that looks like. Obviously, if you work with Vendition, you can just take our whole 90-day onboarding course and edit it kind of as much or as little as you wish, out of the box or not. But and if you don't, I mean, make sure you have your own content, right? It's not just its process, whether it's videos or it's slide decks or it's just a big Google Doc, but really try to make sure you're writing down the new hire training process and that it's not just a verbal way to train, right? It's not everyone is completely auditory learners. And so it's really important to have the ability to kind of visually see what's going on, be able to sit down and read, sometimes go at your own pace, relearn certain things because people are going to absorb it differently. And so, I highly encourage companies to get that content online as much as they possibly can. As far as instructor-led training, right? So ILT, this is what we're really good at as sales dev leaders, is just, you're the manager, you're in charge of onboarding them, whether you're an SDR manager or you're in sales enablement, but what does that look like? Oftentimes the head of marketing or head of product comes in for an hour-long session in the first week and kind of walks them through either the marketing or product, but definitely don't stop doing that, but just think about that as one component of the learning process as far as that instructor-led training done within your company walls. And then the last part, I'm a huge fan, obviously, of mentorship and coaching outside of the company walls. So, think about how to help them find some sort of mentorship and coaching beyond their manager. You'd be surprised how much individuals can share with individuals that are not working at their business around some of the struggles and challenges they're having. It's easier said than done to just say, go find a mentor. But obviously, kind of within Flip the Script, within Vendition, right? You can find there's communities that are out there. There's a Sales Dev Pro Slack group that we help run. Sales Hackers, a great content, obviously a lot of stuff around account executives. There's thought leaders on LinkedIn, but you don't necessarily have to have those one-on-one mentorships, but make sure your SDRs are learning from someone other than just your manager. And I know managers out there don't want them learning from anyone else, but it's good to hear other things that are happening within sales development, right? Like, is text messaging appropriate or not? And so it's good to hear arguments on both sides, and then you can
not.
Yeah,
just full disclosure, it's not cool.
I agree.
Let's get nip this one right in the bud. Don't text your prospects, please.
Yeah. But also, but one thing I will say is, ask that question again in like 8 years, right? Because the reality is, like, things change, and I think that's the no-go zone. I agree with Becc completely, but I'm also very open-minded to hear all sorts of opinions. So I think, if you hear something out there from someone that you think is controversial, then ask your manager, but go out there and seek knowledge for sure. So just to wrap things up in the summary, I threw out a lot here on kind of, the Vendition learning experience and how that's set up. And I want to make sure that not just the curriculum itself, but people really think about that onboarding and teaching process from an academic perspective of how do you actually teach a human being a new skill set, right? And so, and again, it's not just, packing 8 people into a, a conference room. And so from a methodology perspective, there's have a process, right? Recommend backwards design, that knowledge versus skill versus metrics. There's those curriculum feedback loops, make sure the training is actually changing based on what's happening. From a course design perspective, so the way that we onboard new clients is that we actually recommend a new hire training program and then we iterate with them. But I'm just skipping to the end there of just like, you go figure it out on your own if you don't work with Vendition, but figure out how you're going to go create that content. And then from a teaching perspective, right, it's not just step 6, it's not just the ILT by you, right? How can you get more content online and let them learn at their own pace? And then also, is there mentorship and coaching or communities out there where they can continue to learn and improve as professionals? So that's kind of a summary of VLX and a great 7-step process to onboarding your new sales development team.
Thank you very much, James. That was amazing. I'm going to give you a shout out on 2 different points that I loved. Number 1 was starting with the outcome.
Yep.
That's awesome. it's amazing of like, where do we want to go and what do we want to actually achieve? And that's something that when I came, I was mind blown when I saw your process of like, why didn't I ever think of that as a leader of like the goal of the onboarding program should be whatever, 3 meetings and 5 meetings. And we're not just going after, did this person retain this session in terms of buyer persona, but like, did we actually hit our outcome with this PDR in the first month or 3 months? And what is the evidence behind that? I love that. And I love go
just
ahead.
one point on that too. I want to make sure when you define the outcome, like write out a sentence, right? Don't write outcome equals cold calling. Like that's not an outcome, right? Nope. Identify, I want new SDRs to be able to do X within, again, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. But yeah, I just want like actually write out what that outcome is, right? Not, I want to learn how to play the guitar. No, I want to be able to pick up a new piece of music and be able to play 12 chords, whatever that is, but like identify what that is. And sorry, continue on with this.
No, I just think that's amazing. And I also love your second point on knowledge versus skills versus the metrics. And what I see people most often do is they'll say like, okay, what's the metric? They don't plan the onboarding program accordingly, but they'll be like, okay, the metric is, you know, that I need my SDR to be ramped by month 3. And so instead of them thinking about like, okay, at best case scenario, they're thinking about, did this person pass the training course? Like, did they understand, you know, from a knowledge perspective, the thing? And then metrics, I'm just going to hold them accountable to, did they hit quota? But they don't think about that skill piece.
Yeah.
Like, do they actually possess the skill to objection handle? Because
right.
Objection handling is going to come down to a lot of things, but how high is your acumen? Product knowledge? How persuasive are you? How well do you listen? And how well do you read the room?
Yeah.
How well do you read the room? And that's all comes down to skill. So I love that you broke that down of like, let's just not think about, you know, are they hitting quota? Like, do they have the knowledge on what we do as a product? Do they have the skill to convey that appropriately? And also let's think about this metric, you know, as the goal and outcome focused thing that's driving the entire onboarding program. I just haven't seen, I certainly within SMB, you know, I'd argue up all the way into enterprise, unless they have a 25, you know, person team that's dedicated toward this thing. And even then it's like, you know, how are we thinking about the design program? Usually it's onboarding. It's like, hey, James is great. Go listen to James's cold calls and, you know, mirror what he's doing. And if you want some mentorship, I guess go talk to James. And here's a couple, you know, a 30-minute course on your buyer persona, hit the phones. And if you don't hit your ramp quota, then like something's wrong with you.
Right.
You know, like that is SMB onboarding. That is SMB on. I've literally had no onboarding at one company. I literally walked in the door and was handed a computer and told to produce, meaning with a team.
Yeah.
You know, you can onboard yourself, right? You know, so I'm like, anywho, I think that you laid it out so well. To everyone who's on the line, we're going to shoot out the deck afterwards so that you have, you know, more background, you know, and you can have that in front of you when you're thinking about your onboarding program. But thank you so much, James, for coming. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. You know, I had a blast listening to what's behind the curtain for you.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, so thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll send the recording out with the deck afterwards, and go crush the phones.
Yeah, good luck.
Bye.